Okay, so for our revision today, we're going to look at one of the non-fiction texts in your anthology. So make sure you've read Explorers or Boys Messing About and you've got it in front of you as we start to have a look through it. Okay, first of all, it's a news story article. It's from The Guardian, which is a liberal, left-wing, broadsheet newspaper. That means that it normally has detailed, informative, serious journalism in it. Lots of articles about politics and stuff like that. But this deviates a little bit from that expectation in that it's about a kind of human interest story. It does deal with it from a sort of perhaps a more serious political point of view at times, I suppose, in that it's talking about, should the taxpayers be expected to foot the bill for the actions of a couple of idiots, is the kind of implication behind it, isn't it? But this isn't really a heavy political issue here. It's a reasonably light-hearted recount of the incident, and it takes the opportunity to mock, to ridicule those involved in terms of the stance that it takes on it. And because it's a news story article, though, you'd expect the 5 W's in the opening paragraph. So the who, what, when, where, why. In a news story article, you will almost always get them in the first 2-3 sentences, just in those first couple of paragraphs there. It's a structural convention, and partly it stems from the need to edit quickly, in that if you think about if you're an editor and you've got lots of stories from lots of different journalists coming in, you don't necessarily know until the point where you're actually going to print which stories you've got room for. So you might have a journalist who's written, a 10-paragraph article or a 20-paragraph article, but if suddenly you get some big stories coming in at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock at night, you will have to make perhaps ruthless decisions about making some of those earlier articles a bit smaller. Now, what you don't want to have to do is contact the journalist and say, oh, sorry, could you rewrite that? What you want to be able to do is to cut them at lots of different points to make them shorter if you need to, and still get the main facts across. And so that's why, one of the reasons at least, why in news story articles you always get the main facts very, very near the beginning, so that if necessary they could reduce it to just a kind of 2 or 3 sentence article and you'd still get the main facts there. Yeah, so that's one of the reasons. The other reason, obviously, is that newspaper articles are aimed at casual readers, and they want to glean the facts as quickly as possible without necessarily reading the paper from cover to cover. If you think about how you read a newspaper, you don't start on the first page, top left-hand corner, down to the bottom, then read page 2, then 3, then 4, and then kind of put a bookmark in because you're tired. That would be a bit weird, wouldn't it? You just flick through and look at the articles that you think look interesting, and you read the beginning of an article and you think, oh, am I going to want to read that? And you might read the rest of it, you might not. Yeah, so you're a casual reader. You're not a kind of committed reader that's going to read it from cover to cover. And so therefore you want to get the main facts from as many different articles as you can be bothered to look at as quickly as possible. So if you have them in those first couple of sentences, it's much easier to do that. Secondly, short paragraphs. If you notice, they're all 1 or 2 sentences long. Normally, if you were writing something for English, you might expect to write a 5-6 sentence paragraph, mightn't you? News story articles, they're always 1 or 2 sentences long, 3 at the most. Okay, and again, it's because they're aimed at casual readers. You might be on the bus, waiting for their train. They might be on the loo. They might be looking at a television or having a conversation at the same time, and they want to be able to look up and look down and find their place again quickly. You can't do that if you've got huge, big, long paragraphs and you can't quite find where you were. That problem is exacerbated by the fact that newspaper articles are in columns, and so it makes paragraphs look longer than they are. So even a 1-sentence paragraph could be 3 or 4 lines long. The final thing that you'd expect from a news story article is categorization of participants. So you'll notice it constantly says things like 40-year-old Mr. Smith, Mr. Brooks, a property developer from London, Gunter Endres, editor of Jane's Helicopter Markets and Systems. And one of the reasons for that is that if you think about it, in any newspaper, you're going to have hundreds, thousands of people mentioned, many of whom you've perhaps never heard of, or certainly will need a reminder as to who they are. And so constantly, these participants in the stories are categorized. You get a bit of information about them right next to their name, their job, their age, their role, why they're being quoted, why they're being mentioned. And it's so that you can just get a handle on who these people are as quickly as possible. And I guess to say, you know, it might be someone you've never heard of and never will again. Okay. The purposes, then, of the text are to mock, to ridicule, and to entertain, really. Look at the representation of the men, would be the main thing I would say in order to get some points to make about this. First of all, look at the rhetorical question in the headline. The implication is that the second phrase, boys messing about, is the author's opinion. Look at the lexical choices. There's lots of dramatic lexical choices, actually. Look at the word farce in particular. It's a metaphor really here, isn't it? Implying that they're actors in a humorous play. They're not to be taken seriously. They're not serious explorers, adventurers. They're just a couple of blokes having a laugh. The onomatopoeia also could be argued adds to the cartoon-like quality of the narration. Look at the words plunged and plucked. Plunged, plucked. It kind of sounds like the pl, the alliteration there, the onomatopoeic alliteration of pl. Kind of sounds a little bit like falling into water, doesn't it? Pl. So it's almost like you've got a bit of onomatopoeia adding to the humour of the idea of them being falling into the water and then being plucked out of it. Yeah? There's an intertextual allusion to Bond films. I don't know whether you noticed, but it says Mr. Smith, also known as Q. Now, Bond experts amongst you will realise that Q is the eccentric boffin in Bond films, certainly in the traditional ones, and that the conversations between Bond and Q are typically quite funny. And so therefore it adds a kind of a humorous slant on the representation of Mr. Smith. He's like this eccentric boffin character that, okay, might have the knowledge to be able to, you know, to go on these expeditions and so on, but actually he's quite funny. You're meant to laugh at him as well. Look at the loaded language. Look at, for instance, the word claims. In claims to have been flying since the age of 5. Claims? Well, has he? Well, he only claims to. What a ridiculous thing that he's been flying since the age of 5. We don't really believe him, do we? Okay, have a look through the article again, have a read through, make sure you've highlighted all those examples, and make sure you've found maybe another 5 examples of specific words and phrases that you can make points about in terms of why the writer has used those words and phrases. Make sure you've got some points about language, and make sure you've got some points about structure.